Well, hello everyone. I'm David Farzam. Welcome to the second episode of New Cancer Mentality. This is going to be a place where cancer patients can come and get their questions answered by fellow cancer researchers and doctors as well. So today we're lucky enough to have Dr. Carlo Maley with us. Dr. Maley received his BA in computer science and psychology from Oberlin College. And he is in 1998. He received his PhD in computer science from MIT, and he did his postdoctoral work at the University of New Mexico, and he's currently at the Helen Diller Center at the University of California, San Francisco, leading a center looking at the role of evolution on cancer. Wow, that's a lot right there. It's excellent. So, Dr. Maley, let's get it started. So, what got you interested in cancer research? It seems like you're a man of many talents. What made you go into cancer research?
Thanks. Well, yeah, actually, one of the critical things that you didn't mention is that I did a master's degree in evolutionary theory and evolutionary biology, and it was actually through that interest that I got into cancer. I was in my first postdoc. I was trying to figure out what to work on, and looking for the right disease. I knew I wanted to do something about evolution and disease. And I stumbled across a description of cancer as an evolutionary process, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, but I went to the research literature and looked for all the papers that were on both cancer and evolution. And over the last 40 years, there had been just a handful of papers. So it was something that wasn't studied, and I realized that I had the background to pursue this aspect of cancer and possibly make a real impact. So it seemed like the right combination of background and problem.
Okay. So what is your definition of cancer? What is cancer? Is it one disease or many?
Well, I think it's fair to call it many diseases that share a number of common behaviors. You know, the clinical definition of cancer is the invasion of abnormally proliferating cells into a neighboring tissue from where it arose. And so I'm okay with that definition, but there's a lot hidden underneath the hood that we can talk about.
Okay. And then would you agree or disagree with the following statement? No significant progress has been made in the last 20 or 30 years in curing cancer.
I have to both agree and disagree with that. So if you look just globally across all the different cancers, what you see is that the death rate from cancer hasn't changed over the last 50 years, or has barely changed. This is statistics from the American Cancer Society. That's adjusted for age, so it's not just that we're living longer now and getting more cancers. A 70-year-old back in 1954 had the same chance of dying from cancer as a 70-year-old in 2004. But again, if you look under the hood, what you see is that we've made progress in some cancers, particularly childhood cancers, some leukemias, lymphomas, but also lost ground in other cancers. Most of the solid cancers have been really difficult adult cancers and ones that are happening in solid organs as opposed to the blood have been very difficult to cure, and basically all of our cures select for resistance and lead to relapse in a large proportion of cases. So it's been very frustrating for everybody.
Yeah. So what is the origin of cancer then? Where did cancer come from? How did this develop?
Well, so there's sort of two answers to that. The one is the story of how cancer in general as a phenomenon developed, and that's a story that's a billion years old. It really has to do with the evolution of multicellular organisms. So a billion years ago, all life on Earth was single-cellular organisms, and if you think about that for a moment, it's impossible to get a cancer in a single-cellular organism. So somewhere between a billion and 500 million years ago, multicellular organisms evolved, and in order for that to happen, what had to happen is that the cells of the body had to suppress their own proliferation and sort of devote their resources to building and maintaining a multicellular body in exchange for the germ cells, the eggs and the sperm, for passing on the genes to the next generation. So it was this critical transition from single-cell life to multicellular life was really a matter of suppressing the proliferation of the somatic cells. And so you can think of that as suppressing cancer. Or you can, vice versa, you can think of cancer as the breakdown of those structures that evolved to allow multicellularity. So that's the sort of global, big picture answer to the question. The small question is, within any one person, where does cancer come from? And the answer to that seems to be that there are, just by bad luck, every time a cell divides, there's some mutations. There's no copying process is perfect. So when the cell divides, it has to copy all of the DNA. That's 3 billion nucleotides of DNA, and it just makes mistakes occasionally. And if those mistakes happen to be in the genes that are regulating the suppression of proliferation in the body and a variety of other mechanisms that suppress cancer, then those cells will become cancerous. And a lot of my research is about that process. It turns out that it's an evolutionary process, that the cells in our body are competing for resources, and there are typically between 1 billion and 1 trillion cells within a tumor by the time we detect them in the clinic. And they're mutating at a very high rate, and we can talk about why that is. But so you get this big population of cells with lots of mutations inside them, and occasionally a mutation will be advantageous to that cell. That is, it'll start proliferating or surviving better than its neighbors, and it'll take over the tumor. And so you have this natural selection process going on within our bodies that eventually leads to the full-blown malignancy and eventually to the death of the host. But the cells don't know that as they're mutating and evolving. So it's kind of like a species that's destroying its environment and eventually drives itself extinct.
So how do we find these genes that cause this malignancy to happen? Are there certain processes you use or experiments, or?
So the simplest thing you can do is you can take a sample from the normal tissue from a patient and a sample from the tumor, and you could try to sequence the genome in both the normal and the tumor and see what's different. Now, that's a little bit of a mistake, or misses an important aspect, which is I told you that there are between billions and trillions of cells in a tumor, and they're all mutating, so that there's actually a whole diversity of different mutant cells in there, and they have different genomes. So when we talk about sequencing the cancer genome, what we're talking about is finding out what the majority of the cells have in terms of their mutations and genetic changes. But it doesn't tell you about this whole diversity of mutant cells in a tumor that actually are very important in the driving of the process of getting cancer, and also in the process of developing resistance to the therapies and relapse.
And then, so do you believe, so going into the whole mythological state, well, I don't know myth, but do you believe that someday we're going to find a cure for all cancer? One embodying cure that can control all of it?
I see, like a silver bullet that handles all cancers?
Yeah.
It seems hard to imagine that. I think that what I can imagine is cancer prevention techniques that slow down this process of natural selection that's happening in our bodies. And this is important because there's evidence suggesting that cancers take between 10 to 50 years to develop. So if you could slow down that process just by a factor of 2, just slow it down by half, then cancers would take between 20 and 100 years to develop. Or in other words, we'd extend the time before we got sick by another 10 to 50 years. And so we would end up dying of something else. So that's one of the key things that my lab is interested in trying to develop, is how do we slow that process of evolution happening in our bodies. So in that sense, you could imagine something that would work on many cancers, because that evolutionary process is happening in virtually all different kinds of cancers. Now, what we typically do with cancer drugs is we try to find a mutation, a particular gene or a particular protein that's gone wrong, and develop a drug that targets that gene. But different tumors, different organs tend to select for different mutations that are sort of advantageous within the context of that organ. And even within one organ, it's a random process of which mutations arise in a cancer, and we're now finding out there are many different ways of generating a cancer. It's not just a single set of mutations. And so that already tells you that a drug targeting a single protein or a single gene is only going to work on a minority of cancers, and only probably a fraction of the cancers within any particular organ.